Splitgate is a game I'm actually quite familiar with. Not only do I have friends who have worked or are working on it, I've been following it for years now. It's gone through a bit of a revival in recent weeks, and it's a revival I'm actually delighting in. We've seen many industry veterans leave their massive AAA studios, create smaller, less bloated game studios, craft something that they're passionate about, and whether it's a lack of strong vision or too much confidence in a flawed vision, the games have failed, and the developers suffer a tangible emotional and financial cost. The worst thing that happens to us as consumers is that we're just cheated out of a few hours of our day. For the developers, it can mean the complete closure of their job and financial well-being, as well as future hardships and uncertainty if they ever want to work on something again. Seeing Splitgate's developers seemingly pull victory from the jaws of defeat is something I'm finding a lot of pleasure in. I don't think the game is flawless, and I plan to be extremely critical of it in this video, while also balancing that against what I do find great, because despite the issues I have, Splitgate now has a solid foundation that I think can be built upon. I hope Splitgate is here to stay because frankly, it has the ability to carve a niche for itself, and I think it deserves that. If you find yourself enjoying the video, please feel free to like and share this around, seeing as it helps the channel. Without further ado, let's begin.
Game over. Victory. King Slayer.
I've heard Splitgate pitched to people as Halo with portals, and as an extremely surface-level pitch, I think it's an okay one. Splitgate certainly wears its Halo inspirations on its sleeve. It has a bullpup burst rifle with a scope called the Battle Rifle. It's got a rocket launcher with 2 shots per reload. It has a marksman rifle with 15 rounds that involves lots of pacing your shots to use effectively. Your favorites are all here. You know these weapons from Halo. It even has a baseball bat that acts as the energy sword's stand-in to pull out defensively as a melee weapon when players get too close. This is where the similarities end though, because despite these weapons being quite familiar, their roles within the gameplay are simplified, balancing more around range and damage per second than mechanical utility. And to be fair, I think it works well in a game that's paced like Splitgate. In a game like Halo, I think this kind of super simplistic, a gun's range and damage per second is the only thing that makes it special. Balancing makes for a less interesting sandbox experience. But in Splitgate, I think it works mostly fine, and that's due to the complexity that Portal gameplay brings. Instead of grenades, Splitgate's third pillar of player versus player combat are the portal powers you're armed with. Similar to the titular game Portal from Valve, these gateways create what are essentially windows across an entire play space. Place Portal 1 on the other side of the map, and then Portal 2 right next to you, and boom, you've created a link between these two portals, and that link can be utilized in very interesting ways. Let's say you want to capture an objective, but you have no sniper defending you from a vantage point. Using the portals, you can functionally be 2 players at once. Hop onto that objective, place a portal right next to you and then another one high above you, and now you're serving 2 combat roles at once here. The point man of the objective and the point man's defense. Hell, if you aren't careful, you can even accidentally fire upon yourself from the sniper's nest you've created. With that kind of complexity in mind, the seeming simplistic blandness of the weapon sandbox starts to make sense. The hook of Splitgate is, no pun intended, split-second gunfights and the use of your portals in these shootouts. On a surface level, the shooting is quite standard and generic, but factor in the portals and how they can be used to make the gunfights more complex, whether it be that sniper's nest example I gave earlier, or setting up clever traps, like placing a portal behind an enemy, running behind cover, placing another portal, and then getting the jump on that enemy who had no clue his flank was exposed. It's a game of utilizing these portals in clever and smart ways to outthink your opponents. I do, however, think that Splitgate is susceptible to an issue that Halo 5 faced back in the day. Halo 5 adopted a very different kind of design philosophy from traditional Halo, which is the core of the game is these incredibly complex player superpowers, and the sandbox took a bit of a backseat to those superpowers. By designing your entire competitive shooter around a core player ability and have that be where the skill gap exists, you run the risk of a game being simply unable to really grow and evolve, since you can't exactly add or subtract gameplay abilities on a map-per-map basis like you can external weapons, gadgets, map utilities, and other devices or mechanics that exist beyond the player character, if that makes sense. If core player abilities are the name of the game and where the skill gap exists, then those player abilities will have to be on every single map, and it could unintentionally lead to a game that feels kinda samey on a map-per-map basis. That's a weakness you don't have if the skill gap exists beyond the player, due to how complex the superpowers are. The sandbox needs to be balanced around lethality, so that it can simply keep up with the insane things that players are using their portals for. Like Halo 5, there isn't much room for a mechanically interesting sandbox to exist due to the lethality economy that's been created by the unpredictable player movement. This isn't a negative or a positive, by the way, more so just an observation. What's interesting about Splitgate's revival is the core game hasn't changed too much since its release years ago. The edges have been smoothened and tweaks have been made, but the formula hasn't changed too much, and I worry that, like Halo 5, this lack of change is due to the box the developers have built themselves into by making the core hook of the game a very powerful core player ability that can't really be built upon or expanded like an external sandbox-driven game. Splitgate compares itself to classic Halo, but really, I don't think it has a lot in common with classic Halo aside from some of the weapon archetypes. But I said I like Splitgate, didn't I? And there's a good reason for that. It's probably the same reason some of you are typing, Splitgate is not Halo, stop comparing it to Halo. I agree. In fact, I think Splitgate can be compared more to games such as Quake and Unreal Tournament.
Collateral. Killing spree. Double kill. C secured.
What makes Quake and Unreal Tournament so famously competitive and infamously hard to get into is that high skill ceiling designed around an impressively empowered player, with the weapons within the sandbox being relatively simplistic due to the speed of the combat. Quake and Unreal are franchises that have struggled in the modern day due to that high skill ceiling basically making it impenetrable for potential new players. Even the poorly conceived Quake Champions, which was designed to be more accessible and onboarding for potential new fans, was turned into a ghost town since the potential new fans just couldn't get into how fast the game was. And the current Quake fans who are staying with the game aren't really happy with the concessions that were made to try to court this non-existent new player base. It's a lose-lose situation. What I think helps Splitgate be more accessible for people in the modern age is probably the only real thing that it did actually borrow from Halo: the slower speed. In Quake and Unreal, the player's unpredictable and fast movement was quite literally how the player moved. The core gameplay was incredibly fast, and if you were not able to keep up, the game was not going to compliment you. In Splitgate, the player movement is actually somewhat slow and comfortable, even for a controller. The unpredictable movement comes from portal placement, which is all down to aiming, which most people are good at nowadays. The pacing of player movement is controlled more carefully by the individual player, meaning that new players might find it immediately more inviting than Quake's high-speed chases and gunfights. My hand-eye coordination has never been too great, and games like Quake and Unreal have unfortunately always been way too fast for me to get into. I seriously envy the folks who can play them well. It takes quite a lot of reflexes and quick reaction time to be able to play classic arena shooters. Splitgate sits in this comfortable area that's more accessible to me. I wouldn't mind if Splitgate stopped trying to analyze Halo and what it could use from that game and instead started to analyze aspects of those old school arena shooters and experimented with translating what people loved about them into its more accessible and slower-paced combat. That way a new audience can learn to love what Quake and Unreal fans loved almost 2 decades ago. So I guess Splitgate's core gameplay is one that I find extremely entertaining and riveting. It can't really grow and evolve in ways that Halo can, so what I'd love to see it do is, instead of trying to mimic Halo, look to what lessons it can learn from other mobility-driven arena shooters. Splitgate's surprise revival has been a joy to experience, since the games industry can be a ruthless place to developers who simply mean well but couldn't find an audience. The developers of Splitgate are an incredibly passionate group of people, and I remember the day that they released a development update years ago basically saying that Splitgate failed to find a player base, and that much work needed to be done, and it was a black eye for them as a studio. It was pretty sad to read, and seeing the developers host tournaments and retweet clips to their small player base made me feel even more sad, since I was bracing for the inevitable "we apologize to our players, but the servers will need to be shut down" post. I thought it was coming, Quick editor's note, I for the life of me cannot find that original statement from the developers talking about the low player population. It's been buried too much by all of the positive news, and that's just really wholesome. I'm really happy that I wasn't able to find it. To see the developers prove me wrong has been an incredible thing to experience, and I hope that Splitgate continues to grow and foster a community of its own. They didn't quit on this game, and it's paying off for them. Describing the aesthetic of Splitgate is very hard because, in all honesty, it doesn't really have an art style or aesthetic. In 2019, when it launched, it was going for that Tron-style esports arena of the future, with a dash of paintball and some Halo thrown in for good measure. This look, well, not exactly being what I'd call generic, it's not very humble, it's very loud, and it's very annoying if you're not into esports and that montage look. It doesn't make for the most attractive game, and on launch, Splitgate was quite a hard game to look at. Over the next 2 years, Splitgate would see new maps, weapons, and skins added to the game, as well as artistic makeovers for its maps to make them more palatable. And while the map touch-ups are appreciated, the completely new maps and new cosmetics that ditched that esports of the future look has led to Splitgate just ending up as a game with no cohesive art style. Similar to what's happened with Rainbow Six Siege or Black Ops Cold War, Splitgate is a game now with nothing that I can point to and say, that looks like something that belongs in Splitgate. Cats in fancy sweaters are splattering Groot-looking aliens with baseball bats before getting sniped by a Halo Spartan who is holding a rainbow sniper rifle. Instead of refining and smoothing out the off-putting aspects of its 2019 art style, Splitgate opted to throw it out with the bathwater entirely and just not have an art style, which I think will negatively affect the game's recognizability in the long run. Now, the thing about Splitgate is, since it is free to play, it is unfortunately inevitable that it is going to end up with that super ugly mobile game we have no art style because we need to sell the loudest, flashiest skins possible look. I feel like Splitgate could possibly work this messy, directionless art style that it now has to its advantage. So, okay, bear with me for a second. What's to say that these portals only let you travel short distances? Can the portals take these characters to alternate dimensions with strange and alien creatures? Let aliens from Dimension X cross over into the world of Splitgate and run these tournaments with humans? Transform the Splitgate IP into something kind of like Unreal Tournament, where challengers from across the multiverse converge to compete in these arenas using mysterious and alien portal technology that has seemingly brought them all together. You can create a fascinating world out of that, and that world can fuel cosmetics and battle pass and even lore dumps for players who are interested in the world of Splitgate. Right now, there doesn't seem to actually be a universe. It's just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks in terms of its cosmetics. But I think that with this multiverse, portal, dimension hopping aspect, they could actually turn that into an advantage. Take that everything and the kitchen sink lack of artistic focus and transform it into something with purpose and thought behind it. Splitgate is sitting on a gold mine for cosmetic opportunity, and I hope the developers take it. Since I primarily played Splitgate on PC, my views on the user experience and just experience in general will come from that version of the game. Console players, I'd love to hear what your experience was like, just for curiosity's sake. I read the comments quite frequently, so let me know down below how it was on the Xbox and PlayStation. Off the bat, Splitgate is a pretty well-optimized game. It runs remarkably well, while also managing to look quite pretty even on low settings. It's not a high-budget Warzone-like experience. You're not going to see the highest quality photogrammetry assets with animation quality that puts Infinity Ward and Bungie to shame. That doesn't mean it's not good though. Weapons such as the carbine have incredibly snappy, expressive, and personality-filled reload animations. I seriously love the stylish flick of the empty magazine, followed up by the confident slap of a new magazine into the gun.
Killing spree!
I also need to compliment the basic, generic walk cycle. It's rare that I ever point this out in games, but simply walking around with a gun in Splitgate looks really good. The way the gun's stock bounces left and right while the avatar keeps the barrel unsteadily trained at the crosshair. It's good stuff. And speaking of the crosshair, Splitgate does something that not a lot of games do, and I wish they did. It lets you manually change and tweak the crosshair of every weapon in the sandbox. They've got them all here. You can have Halo crosshairs, Counter-Strike crosshairs, original crosshairs, dots, etc., etc. There's a shocking amount of player flexibility and customization here. Some areas of the game where the developers seemingly have not budged, though, are rather annoying. You have no way to disable the giant hit marker visual when dealing damage, which in my experience sometimes makes it actually hard to see who I was shooting at from a distance. The game also does this really ugly thing that Halo 5 did, where it removes frames from animations of players at a distance, and it can lead to enemies almost looking like animated GIFs when they are across the level. And there's no way to disable this and make it just look normal. But the biggest issue for me, personally, was the anti-aliasing of the game. Splitgate looks really blurry at 1440p, extremely blurry. At first I was wondering if I was running the game at half the rendering resolution, but I believe I found the culprit, and it may be the anti-aliasing solution that the game uses. I noticed that the game looked a bit sharper at lower anti-aliasing options, and what I eventually did was, due to the developers not allowing you to just straight up turn off anti-aliasing, I forced it off out of the game using the NVIDIA control panel and then bumped up the rendering resolution of the game to 150%. I then tried to install Reshade so that I could use a sharpening filter and one of Reshade's anti-aliasing solutions to finally smooth out some of those jaggies, but I can't quite get it to work in Splitgate. So if anyone knows how to do that, let me know down below. But this and a lack of more filmic effects such as per object motion blur are really the only issues I have with the options menu and user experience of Splitgate. Oh, that and the inability to turn off the loud hit marker sounds, something that most games include.
Double kill! Kingslayer.
Overall, it's pretty good. Not great, there's room for improvement, but it's pretty good. So, in conclusion, Splitgate is a first-person shooter that, like Halo, isn't exactly an arena shooter, but borrows elements of the arena shooter genre, and uses them to craft something rather unique. Despite a rocky start in 2019, and a rather directionless art style, Splitgate is growing into something unique unto itself. Honestly, right now, I'm considering putting some money into this game. This thing was free, and I've put 10 hours into it already, and I want to play some more of it. It's the least I can do for what the developers gave me. It feels good to see the game doing well. It earned this success, and I hope this success continues. How do you feel about Splitgate? Seeing as I'm not a pro at the game, I'm sure there are small details or thoughts some of you have who have played the game longer. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and with that being said, I'll see you all on the next video.